They said I'd never amount to anything. 10 years later, I hired them all. And their first paycheck had my name in the corner. I want you to tell me where you're watching from. Your city, the room you're in, the time glowing on the microwave, because I'm about to open a door I once thought would stay locked forever. And I want to picture you on the other side, nodding along with me as the elevator doors slide open on a Tuesday that should have been my victory lap. The office smelled like burnt espresso and printer ink, the two perfumes of ambition. I walked past the glass conference room where my slides glowed on the wall like stained glass in a cathedral of metrics. I had slept 4 hours, pressed my blazer until it lay like armor on my shoulders, rehearsed a thank you speech in the mirror until the words sat calm on my tongue. My boss, who liked calling me kiddo in front of clients but Mira only when he needed something fixed, waited by the screen with a smirk he couldn't quite hide. We decided to go with someone more experienced, he said, letting the pause slice me open like paper. Then he waved in my ex-roommate, who walked in wearing my shade of lipstick and my language in her mouth. The room clapped. I stood there, cheeks hot, watching my idea, the one I had built from nothing but stubbornness and midnight, leave my hands in real time. The applause turned to fog in my ears. The pen in my hand felt silly, like a child's toy in a courtroom. I smiled. It surprised me. I smiled so they wouldn't smell the singe. And under that strained smile, something old and steady stood up inside me, like a woman who had been sitting in the back row for years and finally reached the end of the hymn and thought, no more. The first thing I heard in my head was my mother's voice, carried in from another decade and a much smaller kitchen where steam fogged the window and the radiator hissed like a calming cat. Don't wait for permission, Mira. Build your own door. She had said it the first winter we spent in the basement apartment after my father left. 2 spoons, 1 pot, 1,000 hopes. I used to study at the wobbly table while she stirred soup that tasted like a promise and told me stories about doors, how some opened inward, some outward, but the strongest doors were the ones you built from the inside out. The warmth of that memory touched the cold glass of the conference room like a hand on frost. 2 days after the promotion that wasn't, my name disappeared from the shared deck. My login stalled, then blinked error messages like a dying star. HR called it a technical hiccup, in a tone you use when you're warming up a lie. Someone in the break room laughed and said my name like it was the punchline to a joke they never finished writing. My mentor saw me in the hallway and adjusted his glasses without meeting my eyes. A woman from my cohort texted a shrugging emoji and, they're just doing what they have to. I felt the kind of silence that weighs, a quiet that collects at the bottom of your lungs until breathing hurts. So I did the most radical thing I could. I stayed calm. I did not beg. I did not perform my pain for their entertainment. At my desk, I wrapped the tiny succulent from my window in the sleeve of a sweater and tucked my mug into my tote. I wiped the ring of coffee from the desk as if erasing fingerprints at a crime scene. When the elevator doors closed, I watched my reflection in the dull steel, shoulders squared, jaw soft, eyes steady, and I heard my own voice whisper, "Not today." Not like this. The elevator hummed like a patient machine. I pressed my thumb against the tote zipper and felt the ridge of paper beneath, the file I never spoke about. If I learned one thing from growing up watching my mother stretch every resource into something that lasted, it was to keep receipts, literal and spiritual. In the coffee shop on the corner, I took the corner table, the one near the outlet, and opened my personal email. The folder sat there like a patient friend. Inside, drafts, timestamps, version history, every early sketch of the thing they were now celebrating as someone else's. I had emailed myself those drafts at 2:11 a.m., 3:43 a.m., times when the city goes soft and truth walks around in its socks. Each message had a subject line like backbone alt route or V6 kernel idea, private breadcrumbs leading back to the oven where I had actually baked the bread. I downloaded them all again, redundant safety on top of redundant safety, and then I opened a second folder, the quiet one. 2 months before, when a friend in law school had said, "File now, not later. Later is when you're bleeding," I had listened. I had formed an LLC with a plain name and registered the real engine under my own signature. The back end that spoke the language their product lived on. The code that handled the heartbeat behind their glossy slides. It wasn't the whole body. It was the circulatory system. And the license that connected their heart to my lungs had a renewal clause the admin kept checking like a calendar reminder. I sipped my coffee and tasted something like clean water after a long run. "You want experience?" I said to the lid, barely moving my lips. "I'll give you experience you can't buy." I wish I could tell you the next years were a montage. Fast cuts of me high-fiving my team, raising toasts with sparkling drinks, confetti, headlines. They weren't. They were a stack of small days held together by gritty patience. I moved into a tiny studio with 2 windows and a radiator that clanged like someone thinking out loud. I took freelance gigs that paid in money and humility. I built the kind of relationships that weren't loud, but were real. Engineers who answered my texts at 11 p.m. Designers who fixed kerning like surgeons. A finance guy who taught me the difference between price and cost. A developer who loved docs and made our repos as tidy as drawers in a good kitchen. I learned to present with a voice that didn't shake and to read contracts like literature, line by line, until the clauses told me the story of how someone planned to treat me. By year 3, I had angels who believed in what I was building because they could feel its weight in their hands. By year 5, we had a name on the door. A small name, but ours. And a product that did what it said without drama. We didn't throw parties, but we shipped. We didn't trend, but we grew. Every night I locked the office, turned back to look at the rows of quiet desks, and thanked that younger version of me for saving every draft. Meanwhile, the company I left ran on momentum and mirrors. They posted champagne photos with captions like, "To the moon," powered all the while by the quiet, licensed lungs they never thought to ask about. Every quarter, an admin emailed a friendly reminder about the renewal, and every quarter we renewed on time, because consistency was part of the plan. I watched my ex-roommate do interviews about her product vision and felt nothing hot. If I felt anything, it was the cool clarity of a horizon after rain. Pain had calcified into purpose. Purpose had turned into practice. Practice had become a habit, and that habit was building. Then one spring the lilacs bloomed early, and with them came my decision. It arrived the way good decisions do, not as a drum roll, but as a clean line inside my head. I had been reading a book about boundaries, one of those books people make fun of because they're afraid of saying no, and the sentence hit me like a key in a lock. You are not required to water someone else's garden after they've salted yours. I closed the book. I made tea. I called our counsel and asked her to walk me through our options with the renewal. "We can renew," she said, "or we can renegotiate. Or we can let it lapse and see what moves." "What happens if we don't renew?" I asked. She explained the mechanics, the risks, the leverage, the timeline. Her tone was factual, which felt like kindness. I thanked her. I didn't do anything dramatic that day, I thought. I went for a walk past the community garden where small green things insisted on living. I came home, put my mother's recipe card on the counter, traced the purple ink and said, "I won't feed the people who tried to starve me." On a bright Monday that pretended to be harmless, I let the license expire. The emails began at 7:08 a.m., friendly reminders turning into puzzled pings, turning into subject lines with all caps. At 10:12 a.m., their CTO called. At 10:19, their CEO texted, "Urgent." I was in a meeting with my team, discussing pagination and error states, and I finished my point before I stepped out to return the call. The voice on the other end was thinner than I remembered, like it had been stretched too far over the same tired drum. "Mira, we need to negotiate." "You can't just—" "Actually," I said, in the same tone I would use to ask someone to please pass the salt, "I can. You're using my property. We can discuss new terms. Or I can let it go offline permanently." Silence. Not the heavy kind, not the furious kind. This was the delicate silence people leave when they realize the ground under their feet belongs to someone else. "What do you want?" he asked. "Power rarely invents new sentences." "A meeting with your board in 2 hours," I said. "Your counsel present." Agenda in the invite. Bring your numbers. I'll bring mine. The boardroom had always been a theater. Today I chose the role. I wore a plain black dress, a small necklace my mother once said made my collarbones look like commas, a reminder that pauses are part of sentences. Their faces arranged themselves in polite panic. Their counsel took a tone. I raised a hand, palm down, and the tone sat. I connected my laptop to the screen. The license shone in sharp letters. Clause 4.2, Ownership and Renewal. Clause 6.1, Service Dependency. Clause 9.3, Remedies. I spoke softly, each sentence a step that landed. For years, I said, you have relied on architecture you did not build. The code that keeps your promise breathing belongs to me. We can make a new promise together. Or you can begin again without the lungs. I didn't threaten. I described. I didn't sneer. I explained. Then I hit play on a 41-second clip of an internal meeting that someone with a conscience had shared with me. The clip was not illegal. It was merely ugly. Jokes about my temperament, a line about optics, someone using the word hysterical in 2020 like we hadn't left the 19th century. When the screen went black, no one cleared their throat. What do you want? The CEO asked again, eyes on the table. Ownership, I said. Structured equity that reflects operational reality. A revenue share on all products that touch my stack. A public correction regarding origin of work. And a cooperative transition onto our platform that ensures your customers remain whole. They asked for time. I granted 48 hours. We'll come to terms, I said, or you'll come to silence. Either way, I will be fine. I smiled then, not because I was happy, but because I had finally learned what a line sounds like when it lands with both feet. In those 2 days, I didn't pace. I prepared. I took my team to lunch, ordered dessert first to make a point about joy, and watched them bicker about custard versus crumble while I thought about clauses as if they were stitches. At my desk, I reviewed every paragraph our counsel sent until the language gleamed with the right kind of sharp. When the second meeting came, the room smelled like expensive pens and softened pride. We traded papers, initials, signatures. The CFO looked like someone had moved the furniture inside her head. I kept my voice even. I didn't reach for the handshake first. When the last signature dried, the new structure slid into place with a quiet click I felt in my bones. On paper, they bought time. In reality, I bought them. I didn't say that out loud. It was enough to know what was true. The years that followed were the kind you plant and later call a grove. We hired carefully, not for shine but for steadiness. We wrote our values in small fonts and our policies in large ones. We built products with legs instead of wings. The market lifted us some days, ignored us others. We stayed pointed toward usefulness. I still woke sometimes at 3 a.m. with my mother's voice in my ear, telling me to put a little more cumin in the soup and a little more spine in my sentences. I would pad to the kitchen, read her recipe card, drink water from a chipped glass, and remind myself, the point wasn't to win. The point was to become. It is a deeper kind of victory. A decade after the applause that burned my cheeks, I stood in my own glass office and watched the city stretch like a cat in afternoon light. The economy had put on a storm coat. The company I once worked for tripped on its own sheen and went down hard. The line formed at our reception desk. Familiar faces clutching resumes printed on expensive paper. Hands shaking the way mine had once shaken when I was still pretending that asking nicely would save me. My head of people scheduled them in 10-minute increments because structure is a form of dignity. One by one they came in. Some looked humbled, some merely tired. A few wore pride like a perfume that had turned sour overnight. My old boss walked in as if our office belonged to him, and then remembered it didn't. He had gray at the temples now, his smirk a little chipped. He held out a hand. "Mira," he said, the syllables smoothed like a coin he'd rubbed for luck. "You're exactly what we need." I tilted my head. "Funny," I said. "That's what I used to hear from you." He tried a joke about full circles. I saved my laugh for later. The interview was professional. He spoke in buzzwords. I translated them into actual needs. He described his leadership journey. I wrote down which tasks he actually knew how to do. When he left, he looked back as if the door might speak. It didn't. We hired the ones who could help us build. Yes, even some of the ones who had looked away when I needed them to see. I was not interested in vengeance dressed as policy. I was interested in good work done by people who had learned to tell the truth. Their first payday came on a Thursday. The check slid out of the printer with a sound like a zipper closing a suitcase. Clean, final. Each one bore the company name in the corner. Crisp black letters spelling the thing I had hammered together from doubt and deadlines and late rent and early mornings. They lined up to collect. Some said thank you. Some couldn't. My ex-roommate stood straight-backed as if posture could erase history. She took the check, glanced at the corner, and said, "Congratulations." "Welcome aboard," I said, voice steady as an unbroken plate. Someone near the end of the line whispered, "You really did it, didn't you?" I slid their check forward and answered without heat, "No, I built what you said I couldn't." That night I stayed late. The office emptied into the evening hum, and the windows turned into mirrors. I stood with my palm against the cool glass and let the city lights blur until they looked like the first draft of a constellation. I thought of my mother's purple ink, the way she dotted her eyes like kisses. I thought of the girl in the basement with a laptop propped on 2 cookbooks so it wouldn't scorch her thighs. I thought of the conference room applause that felt like hailstones. I thought of the quiet click when the new contract locked into place. "I did it, Ma," I said, and my voice didn't shake, not even a little. Peace arrived not as fireworks, but as a warm hallway you recognize as yours. I didn't want to humiliate anyone. Humiliation is a fire that eats the house you live in. I wanted something else. A life that fit me. A company that told the truth on paper and in hallways. A paycheck with my name on the corner because I had done the work to own the corner. The week after payday, our office felt different. Like a room after a storm when you're not sure if the quiet is peace or the pause before the next clap of thunder. People moved gently, maybe out of respect for the new arrangement, maybe out of superstition. I could feel eyes sliding toward me and away again, like fish under clear water. My head of people put together an integration plan so meticulous it could have doubled as a recipe. Buddy pairings, code-based tours, reverse shadowing, a glossary for our internal shorthand. We paired new hires with old hands not by politics but by complement, front end to back end, numbers to narrative, patience to speed. I walked the floor quietly, listening to the small sounds that tell you what a company is really made of. 2 people arguing about an edge case without raising their voices, someone laughing at their own bad variable name. The click of a door gently closed so a coworker could make a difficult phone call in private. It wasn't smooth. Nothing worth keeping is. On day 3, my old boss, now a director reporting to one of my younger VPs, left a meeting with his face set in a shape I remembered from the old days. The shape of a man who thinks respect is something you drag out of a room by force. "Mira," he said in the hallway, too close to my office door, "I need to be in the decision loop for the roadmap. It's what I'm used to." I held his gaze until the silence grew legs. "What you're used to," I said, "is how we got here." He started to smile, the grin he used to try on when he thought charm could buy him change. I kept my voice flat. "You report to Priya. Priya writes the roadmap. You will support her and bring her the best information you can. If you have a concern, you put it in writing by Friday at noon. I will read it on Monday. That's the loop." His mouth opened, then closed. He nodded. The door between us and the company we used to be stayed shut. There were other moments. My ex-roommate, now an IC on a product team, hovered at the edge of a stand-up like a cat deciding whether to step through a new doorway. "We don't do status theater," her manager said gently when she launched into a long monologue about hours spent. "We do progress and blockers." She took the correction without bristling. I noticed that. Later, in the kitchen, she stood by the kettle like it might confess something. "Mira," she said, not looking at me, "I know I owe you more than a congratulations." I rinsed my mug and waited. "Back then, I thought aligning with power was survival," she said. I told myself I had no choice. You always have a choice, I said. Sometimes not between good and bad, but you always choose. She exhaled, the kind of breath you release when you put down a bag you've carried too far. I'm here to work, she said simply. Prove it, I replied, and I meant it the way a carpenter means wood, without apology. We set a cadence that made sense. Monday roadmaps, Wednesday demos, Friday write-ups that forced clarity. Priya led with a quiet authority I would have killed to have at her age. People leaned toward her when she spoke as if pulled by gravity. Our design lead stopped calling her team the creatives like a separate tribe and started saying we in meetings with engineering. The finance guy who taught me the price-cost lesson built dashboards so clean they made you want to brush your teeth. A slow, steady alignment clicked into place. Not the buzz of big swings, but the click of gears that fit. Then, because stories are honest when they admit the last twist, the thing I didn't see coming arrived dressed as a favor. It began with a calendar invite labeled Quick Sync from a board. Member who had once been a mentor from afar, a silver-haired operator with a talent for turning a room with 5 sentences and a well-timed chuckle. He had supported our original acquisition terms, championed me on panels, and sent succinct notes that always got to the point. He wanted to discuss optics and the next phase. I read the agenda 3 times. Something in the language felt softened, like a knife wrapped in a napkin. We met in a conference room that still smelled faintly of paint. He started with praise. They always do. You've done the impossible twice, he said, eyes warm. Built something that works and absorbed a team that once did you harm without spilling blood. That's rare. I thanked him and waited. He slid a slim folder across the table. I've been approached, he said, by a group interested in streamlining our governance to match our ambitions. His voice put the phrase in quotes without his mouth doing it. They're impressed, he continued, but worried investors might be uncomfortable with personal history influencing operations. Personal history, I repeated, as if the words needed a moment to introduce themselves to the air. He nodded. You hired them, Mira, a noble gesture. But there's concern it, complicates decision-making. We could move to a structure where you become executive chair. Vision, culture, external, while a new CEO handles execution. He said execution like it was an hors d'oeuvre he'd just discovered and wanted to share. I didn't look at the folder. I looked at him. The hum of the HVAC sounded like a distant ocean. Who is we? I asked. He smiled the smile of men who think their names are weather. People who want this to scale. Name them, I said. He didn't. He leaned back and steepled his fingers like a cathedral. This is an opportunity, he said. You've earned rest from the grind. I'm not tired, I replied. I'm building. He nodded as if we agreed. Sleep on it, he said and stood. I didn't sleep on it. I read the folder with a pen in my hand. The language was careful. Shift, streamline, professionalize. The clauses were less careful. Dilute, defer, dislodge. There was a proposed hire attached, someone with a resume like a battleship and references that sounded like rehearsed applause. The package looked generous in the way a golden cage looks like a sunrise when you're too far away to see the bars. The next morning, a Slack message from an engineer pinged. Saw something weird in logging. Legacy service pings increased 10x. All from an unknown IP. Another ping from our risk team. Press inquiry from a journalist at a site that likes blood. Asking if we're overcorrecting past grievances at the expense of performance. And an email from Priya. Short and surgical. Heard a whisper. Someone leaking concerns about your leadership to old contacts. Can I pull logs on doc access and calendar downloads? I sat very still. Not with fear. With focus. I replied to Priya with one sentence, do it. Then I called our counsel, the one who speaks like clean water. I need you, I said, to review our bylaws and flag any language that would allow the board to appoint a CEO over my objection without a supermajority. And I want to schedule an emergency session. Today. We met at 3 p.m. Seat backs clicked. Water glasses sweated little rings onto the table. I laid out 3 things. First, the folder and the language it hid. Second, the press inquiry that smelled like smoke before a match is lit. Third, the logs, a pattern of document downloads and calendar exports from an account belonging to one of the recent hires. Someone who had never spoken to me directly but smiled with too many teeth in hallways. I did not accuse, I described. Then I played a different clip. One recorded by accident during a quick sync when someone forgot to hit leave and went on gossiping. Voices debating whether I would step aside gracefully and whether we can keep her as a brand if we promise her a book deal. The room didn't go quiet. It went respectful. The silver-haired board member cleared his throat. "This is a misunderstanding," he began. "No," I said gently. "This is a bid." I turned to the younger directors whose lives had not trained them to accept inevitabilities announced in baritone. "We left a world where the people who took our work told us to be grateful. We are not going back." I spoke slowly, crafting each line like a key cut to a lock. Our bylaws require a supermajority to change control. We do not have that present. Any move without it will be challenged. In the meantime, I am calling a vote on 3 items. 1. Formal censure for any director engaging in off-book executive recruitment. 2. Immediate audit of admin privileges and access logs. 3. Public affirmation of our operating structure with me as CEO and Priya as chief product. To stabilize the rumor mill we did not spin. I let the word settle, then added, "If anyone believes my leadership is a liability, I invite you to bring a data-backed motion. Not gossip, not optics. Data." Votes clicked into the minutes like beads on a string. Censure passed. The audit passed. The affirmation passed. The silver hair looked like steel that had been asked to bend and found it remembered how to be stubborn. He sighed. "You're making this about the past," he said softly. "No," I answered equally soft. "I'm making this about governance." After the meeting, I walked to the window and let the city's late afternoon pour over me. On the sill, my phone vibrated with a message from Priya. Found it. "Leaker is Evan. He cloned a set of docs 48 hours before his quick syncs with 2 of your former execs. He's been feeding them cherry-picked metrics to paint us as slow." She sent a screenshot. Evan, the one with the good hair and the performative humility, the one who said things like, "just playing devil's advocate" in brainstorms. My reply was 3 words, "Get me HR." We met with Evan the next day. HR sat in the room like a spine. I put the printouts on the table between us and folded my hands. "I'd like to hear your explanation first," I said. He blinked, smiled, went for charm. Hit air. "I was concerned," he said, "about velocity. I thought external counsel could help." "External counsel?" I repeated. "Whose fee would be paid by whom?" He didn't answer. I slid the logs toward him. "You exported a set of sensitive documents and shared selectively to create a story that would push me aside," I said. "You did it the week after cashing a check with my name on the corner." His jaw flexed. He started to say the word optics. I lifted a hand. "No," I said. "Try the real word," he swallowed. "Opportunity," he said. "For whom?" I asked. He had no more sentences. We let him go. "Not with drama." "With documentation." HR followed the policy that protects everyone. Security removed his access. We sent a note to the company that named nothing it shouldn't and said everything it needed to. Values are verbs. Confidentiality is real. We defend our work, not our egos. The journalist never ran the story. The board member with the silver hair called me that evening. "You handled it," he said. Not quite an apology, but close. "I did," I said. "We did." He was quiet. "I underestimated your appetite for this part of the job," he admitted. "You underestimated my appetite for being misread," I replied. He laughed once short. "Noted," he said, and hung up. If the world were a movie, that would have been the last hurdle, the final test before the credits. The world is a kitchen. There's always another dish. 2 weeks later, a vendor failed to ship on time and we faced a gap that would make our customers feel the wobble. The old guard, the ones I had hired, looked to me like it was my turn to raise my voice, to make thunder, to carry forward the cruel music of the place they'd come from. I didn't. I asked the simplest question in the room. What do our users need this week to feel held? The answers reorganized the plan. We wrote emails in human language instead of legalese, offered credits without stinginess, and put engineers on a schedule that protected their sleep and shipped a patch 2 days early because rested minds work faster than frightened ones. The wobble settled into a story we could be proud to tell. Not that we never fail, but that we know how to repair. In the middle of all this, my ex-roommate knocked on my door. She held a small envelope like a white flag. I found this cleaning out old files, she said. Inside was a photo. Me in the basement, hair up, laptop on 2 cookbooks so my thighs wouldn't burn. She had taken it a decade ago, back when we ate instant noodles out of mugs and split rent and truths unevenly. I was cruel, she said. Her eyes didn't ask for absolution. I wanted to be near the people who held the keys. I thought keys meant safety. They sometimes do, I said. They also sometimes mean you're locked in a room someone else chose. She nodded. I'm learning, she said. Keep learning, I replied. And push code. We did more than push code. We changed small things that change big things. Bi-weekly office hours where anyone could ask me anything and sometimes did. A guideline for meetings that made space for the quietest voice to speak first. A compensation band system posted where everyone could see it. Parental leave that didn't require you to make a case for why your family mattered. Our tiny plant wall doubled in size because someone in facilities decided we all needed more green and asked for forgiveness instead of permission. I approved the budget retroactively and bought the whole team falafel. One afternoon, I was leaving the office when the silver-haired board member fell into step beside me on the sidewalk. Coffee? He asked. I nodded toward the corner shop that had watched me gut a hurt and build a future. The barista still remembered my order. He leaned on the bar as if benches had always belonged to him. You were right, he said without preface. His wife had told him once that brevity is the last refuge of the proud when they mean to apologize. He seemed to be trying to be better than that. About what? I asked. Governance, he said. And about the story we think we're in. I thought the point was to make it to the next rung faster than the last time. You're playing a longer game. I sipped my coffee. It tasted like rain just before it falls. I'm not playing a game, I said. I'm building a house. He looked at me over the rim of his cup. I used to think the CEO's job was to make the hard choices, he said. I'm beginning to think it's to make the right ones slowly enough not to break the furniture. Sometimes fast, I said. Sometimes slow. Mostly true. He laughed, softer than I'd heard from him. I hope you don't fire me, he said. Not today, I replied. You voted correctly. By fall, the season of second chances, the company felt like a place I would have wanted to work in when I was 25. We hosted an open house for students who didn't have the right pedigree, but had the right questions. I stood by the window and watched them move through the space the way hunger moves through a pantry. Curious, determined, polite. A young woman with ink on her fingers and a notebook full of boxes tapped my elbow. How do you know when you're done being angry? She asked, as if she had ripped a bandage and hoped I wouldn't scold her. I thought of the day in the glass conference room when the applause felt like hail. I thought of my mother's recipe card, the purple ink, the way she wrote the word rest without any letters touching. When you stop planning their punishment, I said, and start planning your peace. Late one night, when the city leaned into darkness like an old friend, I opened the lockbox in my office, the one that lives behind a painting because drama sometimes wants a cliché, and took out 3 things. The LLC certificate with my signature slightly slanted, the first check we ever printed with my company's name in the corner, and my mother's recipe card. I set them side by side on the table and looked at them the way you look at 3 photos taken in different rooms that together tell one story. My phone buzzed. A message from Priya. New build stable. Team going home. I'm taking the long way. I smiled and typed, take a scarf. The next morning, we had an all hands. I don't believe in speeches that treat adults like children, so I kept it plain. You know what we've been through, I said. You know how it could have gone. I let my eyes rest on faces that had once looked away and now looked back. On faces that had always looked toward me and now looked around at each other. We're here because we chose the slow right thing more often than the fast wrong thing. We're here because we wrote it down. We're here because we apologized when we should and didn't when we shouldn't. We're here because we built something true and then defended it like grown-ups. The next part is the same as the last. We keep our promises. I didn't offer an acronym. I don't like making language into cages. I said questions? A hand went up in the back. The intern with the careful questions asked, "What do we do when someone tries to write our story for us again?" I smiled. "We publish first," I said. Laughter, but the kind that lands and stays. After, in the kitchen, my old boss approached with a different face. Less shine, more weather. "I owe you an apology," he said. "I made choices that hurt you. I justified them with words like business and timing, but they were choices all the same." He looked at the floor, then at me. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I'm not in the forgiveness business," I said. "I'm in the building business." He nodded, as if that gave him permission to think well of himself someday. "Thank you for the job," he added. "Earn it," I said. Months passed the way good months do, as a stack of small satisfactions. We launched a feature that made our users' days 30 seconds shorter in the exact way they wanted. The plant wall climbed another foot. Someone brought their toddler to the office in a dinosaur onesie, and the whole engineering team took turns making the tiny tail swish. We signed a partnership with a nonprofit that teaches girls to code in the neighborhood where my mother once stretched rice with water and patience. I stood at the back of the classroom one Wednesday as a girl with chipped nail polish ran a script she had written and watched her screen print, "Hello, you." Back at her. She laughed like a bell. I texted Priya, "This is the KPI. Winter brought its own truth." On the anniversary of the day I left the old place with a succulent wrapped in my sweater, I went for a walk in the early blue light that makes the city look honest. I stopped outside that building. The lobby still smelled like citrus ambition. The guard was new. He nodded at me as if we shared a secret, which we did. I pressed my hand to the glass and felt the cold bite my palm, a sensation as clean as a new vow. Then I walked to our office, put the kettle on, and wrote 3 emails. One to the board clarifying our next year goals in sentences that could be measured. One to the team thanking them for creating an environment I would have begged for a decade ago. One to myself, scheduled for a year later, with the subject line, "Be the woman who doesn't forget." In the body, I wrote, "Remember the basement. Remember the radiator. Remember the applause that felt like bees. Remember the pen click. Remember the check corner. Remember your mother's purple ink." That night before I left, I stood again at the window. The city lights flickered like a patient constellation. My reflection looked older in a way that felt like a compliment. I thought of all the doors I had tried to walk through that weren't made for me. I thought of the door I had built, and the hallway that had followed, and the rooms that now held people doing good work with good tools. I thought of my mother, her hands resting on a wooden spoon like the staff of a queen in a smaller kingdom. I said it out loud, softly, to the quiet office and the not quiet city. "I did it, Ma." The words didn't feel like a victory lap. They felt like a hand on a shoulder from a woman I loved and the permission to keep going. So here's where we end, for now. They said I'd never amount to anything. 10 years later, I hired them all. And their first paycheck had my name in the corner. The line still tastes like iron and honey. The justice wasn't humiliating anyone. The justice was building a place where names mean responsibility, where contracts mean care, where a young woman with ink on her fingers can ask how you know when you're done being angry and here, when you start planning your piece. I am not done. None of us are. We have releases to ship and policies to refine and a plant wall that insists on climbing. But the girl in the basement with the overheated laptop on 2 cookbooks would recognize the smell of this place, coffee and code, and something warm that tastes like a future you can feed to other people. If you made it here, I want to hear you. Like this story if it gave you even one sure breath. Share it with someone who needs a door. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what you're building. And subscribe so we can keep doing this together. Slow, right, true.